This is a nice little intimate, I think, venue for this kind of discussion. It's what we were hoping for. I also want to recognize that we're talking about politics. We're talking about, hopefully, politics we can be proud of. And we have a couple of politicians in the room. And so I just want to recognize Representative Spencer Igo, Representative Dave Lislegard, different parties, Republican, DFL. I have been in public politics for 12 years, 8 years in the executive branch and 4 years in the legislature. And so I had some inside knowledge. And I had a lot of angst about where things were headed and how divided we were becoming as a people, as families, as communities, and in the legislature particularly. And so as I looked around at who was doing something about this, I was directed by a former legislator to Majority in the Middle, to Shannon. So I contacted Shannon, I signed up for a committee, and about a year later, I was asked if I was interested in serving on the board. And so I went through a nomination process, and I was fortunate to be on the board. Just a small board right now of 9 people, and there's 3 former legislators on there. Keith Franke, Susan Kent, and myself. And it's a working board, and we love it because we think we're doing God's work. So Shannon is from the Twin Cities. She's been up here I don't know how many times now. Fortunately, she says she doesn't even need her GPS. She can drive right here. But she can introduce herself, and I'm just really pleased to introduce her to you today, Shannon Watson.
Thank you. I am enormously blessed to have Sandy on the board. She is by far the most active board member, and if I had 100 of her, that would be amazing. No offense to the other 8, they're great too. But if we had 100 of Sandy, we would be done with this in like a day. So thank you again for the invitation to come speak with this group. My name is Shannon Watson. I'm the founder and executive director of Majority in the Middle. I always put my resume up a little bit because it's sort of human nature for people to want to know, what's your background and why are you talking to us? And so that's sort of my professional stuff. My personal stuff, I currently live in Minneapolis. I'm a Minnesotan by choice. I'm a Kansan by birth. I am the oldest of 3 kids, and I tick all of those psychological boxes of the oldest child. And I have a super cute rescue dog named CJ. And this is the best slide in the whole presentation. And yes, she's named after CJ Craig from The West Wing, so if you know that. All right, so we know that division, when normal differences of opinion sort of splinter into 2 opposing factions without a lot of nuance or space in the middle, is a problem. So why does division, which leads to polarization, happen? Not because we actively want it to, but sometimes there are forces at work that we're not always aware of. And nobody wants to believe they're being controlled without their knowledge, but sometimes we are. The first reason, and I actually get a lot of comfort from this, is that we're divided because we're human. Humans are genetically coded to form in-groups and out-groups. An in-group is your social group to which you feel loyalty and belonging and respect. And your out-groups are the ones you feel a sense of competition or opposition. It's us and them. And members of in-groups generally hold overly positive views of themselves and then unfairly negative views of various out-groups. And so having an in-group, that can foster loyalty and belonging. But the fact that we've got out-groups also generates conflict. And since we naturally gravitate to people who are like us, we have a tendency to self-segregate. Not out of malice or deliberate discrimination, but just because we try to find the place that makes us feel the most content, makes us feel psychologically safe. So we gravitate towards people and places that feel familiar and affirming. Anybody ever do this? You show up for something and you and your friends are all dressed alike? Like, that's a natural thing. In geography, this phenomenon is called the big sort, where we have self-segregated into groups, not by economics, not along racial lines, but by ideology. And self-segregation can create more harmonious neighborhoods, but also echo chambers, where all of your thoughts and your feelings and beliefs are reflected back. And that becomes dangerous when it excludes diversity of thought, because we get to the point that we don't even consider there could be other ideas or other opinions. And this segregation isn't limited to physical spaces. We create online communities with the same segregation of thought as well. Like, for instance, I mentioned I live in Minneapolis. I moved to Minneapolis right before the last mayoral election. And Minneapolis uses ranked choice voting. And there was this campaign amongst some of the mayoral candidates, and it was, don't rank Jacob, don't rank the current mayor, don't put him on your ballot at all. And when the election results came in on election day, he didn't have the most, but he didn't win outright on that first ballot, but he did have the most. And some people that I've been watching on Twitter, who I lovingly refer to as super liberal Minneapolis Twitter, these people were losing their minds. They could not understand what was happening. Somebody actually wrote on Twitter, I don't understand how this is happening. Literally no one I know voted for Jacob. Of course, nobody you talk to voted for Jacob because you only are talking to your in-group. We use division as a bonding activity. I'm not proud of this, and gosh, there's a camera. This is a good example, so I'm gonna put myself. So I was working at a company, and I got a new coworker, and she and I kind of butted heads. Our backgrounds were the same, our jobs sort of overlapped a little bit, and we just couldn't get there, and we couldn't get along. And about 4 months in, we finally found something we agreed on. It was our dislike for another coworker. But that did it, because we had something that we were against. It was us two against her, and we would have the meeting after the meeting and talk about the things. That allowed us to form a relationship, and we were able to get our work done. In that way, it was good, but at the same time, like, we were in opposition to this other person. And then that coworker left, and our relationship fell apart because we didn't have them to be bonded against, which was really interesting. So in groups, finding your enemy is a really helpful way to make the group cohesive and stronger and this sense of teamwork. And the trick is to find an enemy is not a person. So here's the thing. You have to know, like, division is useful. Divide and conquer has been the thing since, like, Julius Caesar? Like, for a reason. And power in itself isn't a bad thing. Power is the ability to get things done. But the easiest strategy isn't always the best strategy. And if a person in power needs to divide and conquer strategy to achieve an end, in my opinion, the collateral damage isn't worth it. Now, luckily, since Julius Caesar, we have spent some time on organizational psychology, and we have determined that there is a difference between organizational power and personal power. And a lot of leaders are paying a lot more attention to how they are motivating employees and constituents and everybody else, just not universally. Campaigns are competitions. In a democracy, or the constitutional republic that technically we are, campaigns are necessary. Voters need choices to make decisions. And when done right, there's nothing wrong with campaigns. Campaigns need to motivate you to vote, to volunteer, to give money, to support their candidate. The challenge is happy people are hard to motivate. It is much easier if there is fear or anger involved. And we figured this out in campaigns. Former Congressman Adam Kinzinger gave an interview to CNN, and he called this out. He said, I'm going to read this quote. If you send out an email that says, please give me money so I can, make the roads better or your life better, you'll raise a little money. If I send out an email that says, if you don't give me $5 or $10, Nancy Pelosi will destroy your family, I'll raise a lot more. So the way political news and commentary is presented by journalists who do try to be balanced is what I call a hidden element of structural partisanship. Having one pundit on the left and one pundit on the right leaves us with this visual that there's only two sides to issues. And since journalism has a bias towards conflict and a bias towards fairness, they present the left side and the right side together so they can check that box. But when was the last time there were ever just two sides to a story? Almost never. Our rate of consumption of news has taken on a whole new scale. It turns out that we are predisposed, again, we're human, to click on negative or outrageous headlines. And not only do we click on it, we have learned to develop this content ourselves. And human physiology motivates us to do it again and again. Because when you get a response to something you put on social media, a little heart or a like or a comment, you get a little hit of dopamine up in your brain. Like, this is like scientific. And that makes you feel good. And anything that makes you feel good, a human will do over and over and over again. So we get caught up in creating this spiral of creating the content that provokes the most reactions to get more dopamine. And when algorithms are set to share the content that gets the most reactions, and the ones that get the most reactions are the ones that inspire fear or anger, like, no wonder social media is kind of this tornado of stuff. I won't use the swear since we're on the camera. All right, so of course we're divided and polarized. And it's a hard thing to get out of. And I have hope. Here's why. Despite what we're hearing, there is a lot of political diversity out there. It's just not loud. This is information from the Pew Research Center. Every few years, they break down left versus right, this sort of binary story, and put people on a scale. And seeing the actual diversity of positions, even among a narrative that's all about polarization, is helpful, to me anyway. Because this shows to me that change is possible. Change does not have to mean moving from one side to the other side. It can be incremental. And as somebody who spends her time working on this really easy problem of overcoming political polarization, you bet I believe in incremental change. I got a lot of friends who are working on this. There are a lot of people and organizations who are working on overcoming division and getting us out of our bubbles. And there is some overlap in mission. This is like 6 of like 1,000. But that's okay, because the more people we have working on this problem, the more people we have aware of the problem, the better. Including business leaders, because frankly, you don't have much choice anymore. All right, so we know we're divided. We're aware that invisible forces are acting on us to divide us or keep us divided. What the heck do we do now? There are things that you can do to help turn down the temperature in your workplace, in your community, in your civic organizations. And none of them involve just like hiding your head in the sand and hoping this problem will go away. I will not say it's easy, but these things can help. And because this is a group that's convened by a chamber, I am leaning into the workplace examples, but most of these you can see how they can be relevant to other things. In politics, there aren't many people who are rewarded for compromising. Many actually find it to be a liability. But that's not the world the rest of us live in. Think about how weird it would be to show up to work and have somebody say, well, the accountants outnumber the sales staff, so the accountants are just going to tell us all what to do, and that's what we have to do. Or the infielders outnumber the outfielders, so the outfielders aren't really going to do much to help win the game. They're just going to kind of stand there. Right? You think it's crazy. But this is what people who go to St. Paul to serve your community deal with. And while half of your staff isn't likely trying to look for ways to tank the other half of the staff, rewarding compromise, calling out and articulating the difficult decisions can be a way to encourage the behavior you want to see and set people up with these skills to hopefully take to St. Paul with them. Carrots are almost always more effective than sticks when you're trying to influence human behavior. So instead of reprimanding division, celebrating collaboration in all kinds of spaces can be helpful. When you make decisions, especially controversial ones, share your why with the group. If you take a stand on one side of an issue or a public policy debate, share the why, and better yet, articulate why you're conflicted. Bring people into that conversation. And why is the most magic of words, because if people understand your why, they understand your motivation. And motivations are so easily misunderstood or mistaken. And if people understand your why, that gives them context. There's a Brene Brown quote, clear is kind. The more context, the clearer things can be. Engage with elected officials. There's a lot of people in this room. Find out who represents you, city council, state senate, Congress, introduce yourself. Send them an email and say, hi, I'm a business owner in your district. I just wanted to say hello. You will get an answer to this email because they almost never get them, right? Right? Like I'm seeing heads nodding. You never get this email. Having a connection point that isn't a complaint is a safe way to become known. And then when you do have specific feedback or thoughts on a bill or something that's happening, they already know who you are. Give them feedback, use official channels, be respectful. Something like, literally like 99% of elected officials in this country are serving part-time. So let your elected officials do their grocery shopping in peace and then come to the city council meeting or to the school board or to the Capitol and do that kind of thing. Even better, if you as a business owner get an opportunity to hire somebody who wants to be in public service, do it. Especially at the nonpartisan local level. Having elected officials with business experience in government can be enormously helpful. Get your information from credentialed journalists, support reputable news organizations who have editorial control and who subscribe to a code of ethics. If you have issues with a paywall, subscribe. It's almost never that expensive. Do not amplify outlets that pretend to be news or promote angertainment with your attention or your dollars. This one's a hard one. If you have a TV in your workplace and it's tuned to all-day cable news, whichever like that, Golden Girls reruns are so much better for psychological health than all-day cable news is. So like, consider turning that off. Advertise as locally as possible. Research has shown that local news outlets are the least partisan, most respected by citizens, and most important to the civic health of a community. And the business model of local news is undergoing some scrutiny and some challenges, as it should. But as you know, people don't really appreciate local news until it goes under. This is a huge challenge. Once we get done with politics, this is what we're doing next. And then we're going to fix the healthcare thing. Find ways for team members to work around shared values where they can avoid political and religious difference. Habitat for Humanity build days, Second Harvest. If it makes sense, do some small dollar fundraising and rotate like who picks the charity and why it's meaningful to them. I used to work for a company where everybody gave $5 and put it in a card for somebody's birthday, and there were 12 of us, and so like over the course of a year, you'd shell out, $55, but then on your birthday you get $55 back. So like it was a wash. But it was cool because when it was your birthday, you got the $55. So doing those kind of things in order to support charities can be an awesome way to elevate those priorities within your team and support local charities while you're at it. If overcoming division is of interest to your staff, host civil conversations or find opportunities to engage groups that do this work. We did this work. Citizens League does this work. Braver Angels does this work. There's a lot of groups that can help you work through those kind of things if you want to have those conversations. Not all groups do. Any voluntary group of people contains a lot of diverse point of views. So actively avoid assuming or articulating that all Republicans think this or all Democrats believe that. All parents, plumbers, pickup truck drivers, people who drop things, Rotarians, chamber members, they all have some things that they share, but they also have a lot of different diversity of thought. So participation in a political party should not have to mean 100% endorsement of the people that they're with in that party. Like, of the one thing that came out of the speaker's fiasco over the last 20-some days, I think was the best thing was showing the amount of ideological diversity in the Republican Party. Democrats have been dealing with this for a long time, and sometimes it gets dealt with sort of, behind closed doors. But that's the way every group is. And so just because you have the same title doesn't necessarily mean you agree with those things. So rethink hard stops and sort of non-negotiables. Avoid holding your Republican or DFL next door neighbor responsible for something that a member of Congress said during a press conference. They were not the target for that comment, guaranteed. Let differences be a minor blip not a major barrier. If you have somebody in your life, in a civic organization, in your workplace, whatever, who you disagree with politically, and you don't really want to get into it, whatever, find 5 things in your relationship you have in common, prioritize those. There is almost no relationship that you can have that if you have 5 things that you deal with, that you will run out of things to talk about. Most of us just don't have the luxury of avoiding people of different political persuasion at work or in groups. And here's the thing, having different political views is acceptable, even in 2023. Getting along and reducing polarization does not mean that you have to find a way to participate in political conversations. Sometimes it can mean just not centering politics in the way we think about others. Focus on the positive. Avoid the doom scrolling. Put your time and attention towards what you can control and affect. And then find the middle. Please tell me you guys know who these people are, right? I have a particularly hard time with this one in some audiences. People are like, who is that? Yes. So that's Wednesday Addams. That's Christina Ricci from a long time ago. Wednesday Addams. And Pollyanna. Yes, Haley Mills. Yes. Which I have this slide from my dad because he had a huge crush on Haley Mills growing up. And still does. All right. So this is the part where here's we're divided and here's what we have to do with it. The second part of the presentation is what majority middle is and what we're doing about that. If you have questions about this first part, we can do those now, or I can skip ahead. Okay. Okay. This group is also kind of like singing to the choir, so. All right. So here is what we are doing. Majority in the Middle has 3 goals. We're giving those in the middle a place to gather outside the back and forth. We're elevating voices of people who are modeling the behavior we want to see. And we're working on ways to bring a little more civility and a little less partisanship to our politics. Giving people in the middle a place to gather, creating both a physical and metaphorical space for those in the middle. And middle, to us, has a broad definition. It kind of means, like, if you feel like you're in the middle, you're in the middle. That can mean you can be on one side or the other and consider yourself a moderate. It can mean you hold some positions from the right and some positions from the left, and so you sort of don't belong on anybody's team because you belong on everybody's team. Or, and this one's my favorite one, you can be super into your party and also believe in cooperation and collaboration. We open up for all of those. We host social events so you can meet and interact with people who also feel like we can do politics better. These are 2 we have coming up. If anybody's in the metro, on Monday we'll be in Blaine. On Thursday we'll be in Shakopee. Host events with speakers. This one is, we do our Zooms statewide. We actually have a statewide footprint, and we want to have a statewide footprint. So if we have groups that are meant to interact, we do those in person. If we have speakers to listen to, we do those on Zoom. This one is a conversation that I have been waiting to have for like 2 years. So Susan and Jeremy were both in the Purple Caucus early in their Senate careers, and then as they went through, they both became leadership. And so my question to them is, how did your participation in the Purple Caucus influence becoming a leader? Because caucus leadership is not about the middle. So that one's going to be cool. That one's Wednesday, November 8th at noon. We have a membership program, so you can be part of what we're doing and show your support if you want to. Memberships start at $25 a year. We are very happy if people can and want to contribute more, but we want the entry to be as low as possible. What's important to us is people have been asking us for a couple of years, like, oh, this is great, how do I join? And we didn't have like a way to join, and now we do. All right, elevating voices of people who are modeling the behavior we want to see. In September, we released our first State of Bipartisanship report. We analyzed the authorship of every bill that got a hearing. And this came from, somebody had asked me the question, well, if you're in the minority, can you actually get your bills heard? And I was like, well, I mean, sort of, I don't know. Like, I assume so in a little bit, but also maybe not. Who knows? Nobody ever counted, so we decided to count. So we noticed, as we were counting the bills that were getting hearings, that if you classify bills as DFL or Republican, just based on the chief author, you get a binary picture of bills getting hearings. So this is all the Senate committees this year, and these are all the bills that got hearings. And what we quickly figured out is that bills are more nuanced than that, and there's sometimes strategy about who's the chief author and who's the secondary author. And if you take total authorship into account, instead of the red versus blue, there's a whole lot of purple hiding in this data. So this is what we call the hidden bipartisanship. These are the exact same bills as here, and just instead of who the chief author is and their party affiliation, this is total authorship. So it's kind of hard to see on the screen, and if you like this, all 113 pages of it are on our website. You can look at that. But we think it's really important to tell this story because not all politics is terrible. Not everybody hates their colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So in 2024, we'll publish another report. We're going to make an effort to help media find the stories of the hidden bipartisanship and tell those, because this story does not wind up on the front page of the paper. All right, that rolls us into our last area of focus, working on ways to bring a little more civility, a little less partisanship to our politics. What happens here and in state capitals across the country is largely governed not by law, but by rules and customs that elected officials make for themselves. And some of the rules and customs serve as an impediment to forming relationships across the aisle. For instance, it is custom in Minnesota for members' offices to be separated on different floors or wings by party. So it's like physically separated. And when you're physically separated, the only time you really interact is in committee or on the floor, which are very performative spaces. It's harder to form relationships. So why not mix it up? I have been told by a current House member that if I try to take this on, it's going to be like World War III. So we'll see about that. But committee seating, it's kind of hard to see, but this is a House committee where the DFL sits on one side and Republicans sit on the other side. And they sit on literally opposite sides. And in big committees, when you have so many people, it actually wraps around. This is a U shape. It wraps around. So not only are you sitting opposite the opposite parties, then you got people sitting there with their backs to the other people. And if 90% of communication is nonverbal, this is a terrible message to send, on purpose or accidentally. And so no wonder this space feels antagonistic, because the seating makes it that way. In the Senate, the seating is assigned differently. So I can catch pictures like this. This was tax committee this year. Don't tell the tax CA that I took a picture in the committee, because I would get in trouble. You're not supposed to. Y'all know the tax CA. It's Mitch Biggren. All right. So this is where we're leaning into the experience of people like Sandy who have been there, done that, to help find the customs and rules that can break down some of the partisanship and start building the relationships. And those things can help. Another part of a little less partisanship has to do with the local level. Legally, every local office in Minnesota, county commission, school board, city council, sheriff, park board, those are legally nonpartisan offices, every single one of them. But over the years, this hasn't been the case as party endorsements, and the division and partisanship that comes with those seeps in. So our focus is going to be, once we figure out how to do it, keeping nonpartisan offices nonpartisan. All right, getting about to the end of time. I'm just going to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. If you want more information, news about what we're doing, you can find it on our website. You can scan that QR code. I'll leave that up, so you can find that if you want. And then my information, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you want to get involved, I am happy to do that. Oops. This is not part of the presentation, but these are my parents, who are very cool. And it's my mom's birthday. All right. Questions? Comments? Okay.
So in the committee hearings, who controls the seating arrangement?
Committee chairs do.
Committee chairs.
Yes.
You just need to find some chairs that will be like, no, this is ridiculous. We're going to mix everybody up.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we did in the State of Bipartisanship report is we called out some best practices that we saw. So committee seating was one. Ann Rest in tax committees, she had a rule that she said on the first day of committee, which I thought was fascinating. She said, we're going to hear Democrat bills, we're going to hear Republican bills, we're going to hear bipartisan bills, What I will not do is hear a bill that has 5 authors of the same party. So in the Senate, you can have up to 5 authors. In the House, you can have 35. Why the House is twice as big as the Senate, but you can have 7 times more authors, I don't know. That's fine. They like that. But so what she was saying was you could have 4 from the same party and like your little hopeful bipartisanship spot. But if you have 5 of the same party, she wouldn't hear your bill if it started in her committee. And like that is an example of structural bipartisanship, is by encouraging those things. And committee chairs actually have an enormous amount of power to what goes on. So and to give the House a break, part of the challenge is we're in very old committee rooms, and there's not nearly enough seating going through and having a new building. I won't get into that, but hopefully then the seating thing can be part of that renovation. I know.
That Senate thing that you showed, the one that had the most bipartisanship was Health and Human Services.
Yes.
And that's because those 2 chairmen who switched here were good friends and in similar parts of the.
Yes.
They're both in Anoka County or something.
Yes. Hoffman and Abler both are very committed to not having that committee be partisan. And that's reflected in the data. This other one here, transportation, is because the committee chair and the minority lead have a really good relationship. And the committee chair said, any of the bills that put in a hearing request, we're going to hear. And I know that for a fact because there was one committee hearing that they heard 48 bills in one hearing. Like, it was insane. So a lot of this can be determined by what the committee chairs say, because what they say goes. Sandy.
Yes, Shannon, can you talk a little bit about how legislators are not rewarded, basically, for collaboration, and how one of the gaps I think that this organization fills, is hoping to fill, is that void. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Well, I imagine there are people in the room who could speak to it much more credibly than I can. But one of the things, in 2020, when we put this together, I wasn't sure. I was like, we got to do something. I don't know what it is. We got to do something. And so I talked to a lot of current and former legislators. I was just like, can you tell me about your experience? Because I've been in and around the Capitol for a long time, but I've never held an election certificate. And the only time I have been in caucus, it was when I wasn't supposed to be. So, what goes on behind closed doors, I don't know. And so there was one former legislator in particular who I said, hey, can I have 20 minutes of your time? I'd love to hear about your experience. And he said, sure. And he said, call me at this time. And I said, great. And I told him sort of what I was working on. And he talked for an hour and 20 minutes straight, and I didn't get a word in edgewise, but I have about 14 pages of notes from that call. And one of the things that he was telling me was that and then I heard this from other people, that the barrier to working across the aisle doesn't come from the other side of the aisle, it comes from your own side. And he said he had personally had everything from sort of teasing to, oh, you're in the wrong caucus room, you must be a Democrat, or teasing to ridicule to threatening of committee assignments, because they did not like the work that he was doing across the aisle. So I have heard that reflected from other people. That may not be a universal kind of thing. But I would say anybody else who does hold an election certificate or who wants to talk about that, feel free.
I'll add to that aspect. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing in the House, for instance, we've had so many new members since just I was elected in 21.
Yeah.
And we came in a time where we couldn't even be in person for 2 years.
Yeah, your COVID class.
So the biggest part of legislating is having relationships. And when you have, Dave, what is it now? We have 60 new members in the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 60 new members that have never had the chance to really get to know each other, and we dove right into the most fast-paced session we've ever seen historically.
Yeah.
No one's had any time to get to know each other on a personal level. And it's incredibly hard to do so when you do 2 years of not getting to know each other. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles we're trying to get over right now. And it's because it takes courage from both sides to go just sit down and talk to each other.
Yeah.
Because is someone going to be trying to get an edge in on me, blah, blah, blah. But there's people doing it.
Mm-hmm.
There's people doing it.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And I will say, the House committees the seating is not assigned, it's this side and this side. There are people who occasionally do cross the aisle and sit on the other side. Yes. Yeah. Other thoughts? Actually, and I'm not going to start World War III if that's not going to be productive. But the offices was one of the things that we'd heard because of the debate of working remotely or in person, and those relationships. Like think about in your workplace, the people that you share space with are the people that you get to know on a personal level, whether you want to or not. You see the pictures they have on their desk, or they have questions about grandkids, or you're just walking down the hall. How was your weekend? Or standing in line for the microwave and talking smack on whoever microwaved the fish. Like those kind of things are the basis for relationships. This just sort of forced, okay, we're working together and now we're in relationship. Like those aren't really those building blocks. So the more time that there can be to that point, those sort of relationship building things, the better. Because then you can find the 5 things. I'm going to go here and then Kyle.
So one of the things that I found working on a couple different legislative committees for different industries and working with our lobbyists is that when we had specific bills, we always tried to find someone on each side to author them. And that was eye-opening for me as a voter to say they do work together a lot. And I think the general public that doesn't get involved in this doesn't get that. And I mean, there's definitely divisions, and you'd hear some of the snide remarks and stuff even between the authors, but it was really eye-opening for me. And I think educating people is the most important part, especially because people don't vote. And we're hearing that from the national level. If Democrats do this, Republicans do this, people won't go and vote. And that, I think, is the most important part.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is the story that needs to be told. Also because it reinforces for the people who do it that, yes, it's being done and you're not necessarily going out on a limb. I will say I had conversations with people behind closed doors during session this year, and some people were like, yep, love the bipartisanship. Absolutely, I'm into it. Great. Anything you can do to promote that, wonderful. There were some people who said, yeah, I do try to work in a bipartisan fashion because I, as a human being, want to do that. So they said, I do not promote it because I will get a primary, which is sad. So, yeah, Sandy. Yes. Here, Sandy.
I was never I never had a primary. I was only served 2 terms. But I saw that happening all the time in my caucus. Because on the right side, if you're not far enough right, you will get primary. On the left side, if you're not far enough left, you will get primary. And so that also speaks to the internal workings within the legislature. When I was in the House, unfortunately, we had 4 far-right legislators that formed their own new Republican caucus and actually attacked the other Republicans using social media. And you, the voters out there, don't know what's going on. You see somebody's putting out, well, look at this. None of the Republicans voted for this bill that I put out. Well, that's your problem. You don't have a good relationship. But that's the kind of thing that happens is moderation does not get rewarded. If you can be out there with the extreme piece of legislation, even though no one will sign on to it, you can take that on social media and make hay with it. And so, one of the things that I think that we can all do too at the voting level is promote people of good character to run for office.
Amen.
And, I don't know how many people in this room would know where to go for caucus. I mean, where do people go that are moderates, that are a little bit left and a little bit right? Where do you go? Where do you go and feel comfortable? And so what you get is oftentimes candidates that come through the endorsement process. They're endorsed by the extremes, people that show up. So there's systems change. I mean, there's so much work that could be done in this area in how we even get candidates out there in the field in the first place.
Yep.
And when I was there, in 2018, for instance, Donald Trump was not on the ballot. He had served 2 years. There were so many suburbans so angry with Donald Trump, they couldn't vote him out. So what they did, the next best thing is they voted out all the Republicans. And we lost 18 suburban people who, those were the moderates, because they're in purple districts. They're in districts that could swing either. We lost 18 of them and went from the majority to the minority because, because of higher up on the ticket. So we need those people. We need the statesmen, the stateswomen in the legislature that are there for the greater good of the state, and Congress, obviously, for the greater good of the country. And, knowing there's gonna be show people, but that's, being primary is a real fear of legislators.
Yeah, I can't name a legislator right now who's more afraid of somebody across the aisle than they are afraid of somebody within their own party. Yeah, Tom, and then Kyle.
Well, I was gonna, Spencer, of course, is right. There was 2 years in there where nobody could see anybody. We're afraid of seeing anybody, but with what you talk about physically getting together with people at the state legislature, the Minnesota Senate building, is practically brand new, and that's got a real chance to really to do things. And with the money they're going to put in the new SOB, which is the state office building. I would think that if with input from people like you, maybe the House would decide that they could do things that would be a little more conducive to getting together.
Fingers crossed.
But it's a possibility.
And sometimes it's about elevating these things that people don't think of, because it's really easy just to have your head down and dealing with all the avalanche of bills. I mean, Kyle.
It seems like organizing the offices by geography makes sense, because especially with being in rural Minnesota and feeling and seeing the metro-rural divide, that rural legislators could form better relationships to push back on the things that affect us in rural Minnesota better if they were near each other.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Just it's who you have relationships with, and how you can leverage those. Somebody suggested one time, have a lottery for all the offices, and then that is that district's office forever. Obviously, some offices are better and they have better views and they're bigger and whatever. So that was part of a thing. I mean, humans are going to be humans. I care where my window goes. So it's a good illustration of a thing. Go ahead. Yeah.
I may have missed this while I was out of the room at the beginning, but did you cover kind of what your funding sources are for this organization? And
I did not.
Looked at partnerships with other organizations. I saw the group that's there, but chambers of commerce or kind of outside of the political spectrum. Did I miss that?
You did not.
Okay.
So good question, and thank you. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit. So we get all of our funding right now comes from individuals. We are interested. We just had our 3rd birthday, and so looking at year 4, and we probably grew more this year than we did the other 2 combined. So we want to keep that momentum going. And so we are having those conversations with foundations, with individuals, with, corporate philanthropy. Pretty much anybody who wants to give us money, I will have a conversation with them. Because this money, we need to fund the time, we need to fund the people. I will tell you, doing this report this year, we had no idea the volume of bills that was going to be. This was a really, I don't want to say dumb year to start this project. But even having all of the bills introduced in the first year of the biennium has been more than any other biennium total since the early 80s. And that was as far back as Gary Carlson would count. So, yeah.
So because this is being taped.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about the Purple Caucus and why you're looking at that with the 2 leaders that are coming up to speak for?
Yeah. Okay, so that event is on Wednesday, November 8th. It's lunch and learn. It's noon to 1 o'clock. It's on Zoom. And so there was a group called the Purple Caucus in the Senate. It doesn't really exist anymore. But it was exactly this. It was Republicans and Democrats getting together and talking about issues, talking about things, forming those relationships, and then figuring out, what could they do together. And so Susan and Jeremy, when they first got to the Senate and they were there, they participated in that group. And so they had relationships. So when Jeremy became the majority leader and Susan was the minority leader, they already had that relationship. And I had heard from them individually, that was helpful. And just the function of leadership within your caucus, the leaders are kind of the attack dogs. And so, I won't get ahead of the two of them, and I'll let them speak for themselves on the 8th, but I don't think that was entirely comfortable for either of them. And part of it was because they did have these relationships, and they knew each other as people, and they know it's not just the binary red versus blue. So yeah, I've been looking forward to that conversation. We were going to do it in 2021, and then it got canceled, and just a timing thing. And so we're finally going to do it, so I'm excited. Yes?
Number one, thank you for calling out local media.
Yes.
We really appreciate that support. But one of the things that came to mind while I was listening to you is I get all of the messages from the senators and the representatives that come back. We don't report in as traditional reporters do, but we get all the information. I think one place where there might be some room for training or communication is with the communication officers of those representatives and senators. Because the way some of those come through, it's picking a fight right away. It's not information. It's just, okay, this is what the Republicans did, or God darn those Democrats. And it's picking a fight right there in their communication. And I don't know how much it is a method for renewing the campaign or to stand up for the party. But some of them you read, and like I said, I don't report on them, but I get them. It's like, oh my word, ew. So I think the I've been a professional communicator in public relations, and some of this, you can ease it or you can work toward the middle in those communications, and the media won't go down the dark rabbit holes like they do.
I did an op-ed 4 or 5 years ago, and one of it was ways that the legislature could bring some of these things down. And one of those was depoliticizing the comm staff, because the comm staff work for the caucus, they work for the party, and so part of their job is to elevate that party message. And if elevating the party message is that the other party is terrible, that's what they do. There are very few bipartisan press conferences. There are a couple. But there are very few bipartisan press conferences, again, because the comm staff would have to work together, and that's hard because they are in this antagonistic relationship as well. Not because they're terrible people, but just because that's the function. It's the way it's set up. So, yeah. There's a great book called High Conflict by Amanda Ripley. I love this book. It's amazing. But it's about when you get into an antagonistic situation and then at some point the conflict itself takes over. And one of the things that really resonated with me was a line in that book was, you're in high conflict when no concession, no matter how small, even if it will help you, becomes even thinkable. Like if it helps the other side, which is something that we saw a lot when it was, different parties we had forced bipartisanship. But there was a lot of things that didn't happen because nobody wanted to give the other side a win, or they didn't want to give the governor a win, or whatever. That's been happening for a long time. And we let that, as voters, we let that be okay. And so one of the things that we're telling people is, if this is something that you value, if this is the conduct that you want to see, you've got to let your legislators know, because they're not hearing that message. They're hearing from the people who are angry or who like that kind of messaging, or who are advancing an agenda. So the majority of people in the middle have kind of opted out, and that's one of the challenges that has left these two sides. It's not that that people have gone to the sides; it's that the bottom has fallen out of the middle, and we've been too quiet for too long, and so we need to speak up. Other thoughts? All right.
Wonderful. Do we have any more questions for Shannon?
All right.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Kyle.
What are the odds of a strong third party then to
Oh.
bring in the people in the middle that feel like they don't belong on either party now?
You know, some research that came out from, it was Gallup or Pew, I don't remember which one, earlier in this year. And for the first time, more people identify as independent rather than one of the two major parties. But again, if you dig down into that, there are people who they generally have a left or right lean. They just don't want to use the label, which to me means that's a brand problem for the two parties. I don't necessarily know that third parties are hard, and part of structural partisanship is the two major parties being very invested in just having, just fighting one front. I mean, it's like war. If you have a chance to just fight once, then you're going to do that. If you have to fight this way and this way and this way, like you're not going to want to do that. So they have a considerable amount of interest, and like that's the thing. Like I'm not disparaging people who work for political parties. They are doing their job, and part of the unintended consequence of that is that they shut others out, other voices out. I don't know that there is an alternative middle that could enable its own political party. I think there's usually enough difference that people are like, well, yeah, I'm over here, but maybe I believe in some of that. And so like just not having to go 100% over here or 100% over here, like maybe we mix it up, yeah, maybe it's 90%, maybe it's 10%, those kind of things. I think that has a lot better shot than a third party actually making a difference. That being said, Jesse Ventura, so I don't know. That's like a Minnesota asterisk, right? Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I know we want to respect everyone's time.
Yes.
It's 1 o'clock, so we need to go. First, I would like to thank Sandy for bringing this to our...
Yay, Sandy.
And Shannon for doing such an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for showing up.